The YouTube channel has a series of new public service videos available about misinformation and how to spot it. They say we should be suspicious of anyone claiming to be an expert and anyone who's peddling fear and videos that claim that their view is correct and everyone else is wrong. Wow, we could have told them this, and they think we're the conspiracy theorists. Welcome to Illinois Bridging Awareness. I'm Stanley Smith at Illinois Bridging Awareness. I think we're trying to bridge the gap on a number of different topics and the reality of living our day-to-day lives and our spiritual and our soul purpose selves and the gap between those two sometimes seeming disparate realities. Last Saturday, we talked about being demon possessed or haunted by false narratives. And on the call, we ended with the sentiment that we are the light, and God has enjoined us to be so. And we naturally have to ask, well, are we really living our lives that way? A number of people in the course of our journey together, describe themselves of being empowered. And it occurs to me sometimes that even in our empoweredness, maybe we're hiding out sometimes in our empoweredness. I was reminded on last week's call of the song about the out of the dark and into the black, and the lyrics of that of out of the dark and into the light. And they say it's better to burn out than it is to fade away, and that we're on a journey out of the dark and into the black sometimes. And once you're gone, you can never come back. I guess we know at least we can't take back anything we say. And I was reminded on the call again of the importance of words. The Benjamin Moore Company a number of years ago had a series of color analysis that were very in depth based on social trends and long-term planning. And the program ended actually in 2007, oddly enough, when they predicted that we were at a tipping point in history between different ages. And they described it at that time as a opportunity to step out of the dark and into the light, or doing just the opposite and stepping out of the light and into the dark. And I was especially intrigued by this, especially coming from a paint company. But we've discussed in the call the concept of good and evil and light and dark. And I think most of us are pretty self-assured that we know we're good, but we have to be aware that in that paradigm, if there is evil, evil is looking back at us, and it's thinking the same thing. It thinks it's good, and it thinks we're evil. Good and evil is very much a human construct and paradigm, and it's probably not God's paradigm. God's paradigm is humanity. Brene Brown explained that, being in a company of people who hate the same people you hate is not community, and it's not an expression of humanity. And living in such a construct is ironically very isolating. We can be in the company of other people who share the same beliefs we have and hate the same people we hate, but that's not community. That's a very isolating way to live. She said that isolation leads to polarization and bifurcation. Polarization leads to an endless cycle of isolation, and isolation leads to dehumanization. Dehumanization always starts with language and words. On the Saturday call, we've talked about noticing things that we haven't noticed before, and considering that we might be wrong about some things. We've also looked at the idea of the glass being half full or half empty, and seeing that how the empty part actually might be the most promising opportunity available to us. So after all of our calls and our journey together so far, we every so often have to think, well, where are we now? At this time of the year, I'm not embarrassed to say, especially annoyed with the the New Year's greetings and wishes for a happy new year and all this sentiment about how last year was so terrible. I was the last one to realize or to know, to find out that last year was so bad. I didn't know last year was so bad. And I don't know if wishing people a happy new year and hoping for the best things in the new year is that an intention or an indictment? I think it's always hard to know where we are or where we've been. I think a lot of us think that history is pretty certain. We know what history is and what it was, but that's actually not altogether true. I've talked to people who have PhDs in history. I've talked to, experts, and they tell me that history has a lot of holes in it, and historians have to use small fragments, like she described it as like, pieces of paper and sawdust that you kind of have to glue together and make something out of to create the narrative of history. It's not a finite science as we might think. So I don't know if we can fully know if last year was good or bad. And I don't think we can know if this year, and how will we even know? Will any of us know when the good is happening? I think we'll know, but I really wonder if we'll know. People in the past um, were living their lives the best they could, and they probably didn't know where they were in the storyline. If you look at historical fiction like War and Peace, I don't think people really fully understood the full scope of what was going on. And in our lives, the history of our lives that we can remember, um, mine starting in the 1970s, I've recently found myself comparing the time we're in right now to the 1970s, a time of economic recession, if not depression, energy crisis, inflation, and world turmoil. It's not altogether a lot different than where we are now. Probably in my lifetime, the only major historical bright spot would have been maybe the fall of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And then the 1990s, the relatively prosperous time of the 90s. But somehow all that came to a screeching halt, and we were back on track for doom and gloom with the 9/11 attacks, followed by the housing collapse, the financial collapse, and now the pandemic. It's just been a series of events which have unfolded that we really still don't really understand the full context of how it's affected our lives or what it's all meant. None of us really have a clear picture, and we sometimes have to depend on these experts. And someone told me yesterday that an expert is anybody who's worked in the area for 10 years. I thought that was especially interesting, and made me realize that we often hear from experts, and it's presented to us as expert opinions. But I think we need to think a little bit more about the opinions. It's their opinion as somebody who's been making a study of something for at least 10 years or more. In my journey, I have come across the notion that in our younger years we have strong rote memory skills. We can memorize facts and remember figures and recite those back, very quickly. But as we get older, that fades somewhat, and we establish a new type of memory, which is the moral memory. We don't necessarily remember all the facts and figures, but we remember how things happen or how things work, and that's probably more akin and more helpful to where we are right now. We know how things happen and how things work instead of facts. So we don't always need to figure it out or know everything, as long as we know how to navigate how things happen. So what's next? I guess we're looking how we can move the needle in our lives in the scope of all the history and things that are swirling on around us. How can we move the needle in our lives personally and together, and then see how that makes a better year, and then look for the markers that point to the idea that, oh yes, this is a better year because the needle is moving in my life. I guess we could all ask ourselves, do we need a house committee to look at our lives? Would we ask God or want God to form a house committee to investigate how we're doing? And what would that investigation look like? And what would he be looking at? But truth be known, God probably isn't interested in investigating our lives or even judging our lives, because God loves us completely and unconditionally. But if we were going to form a House committee in our lives and in our world today to move the needle, we might consider having a House committee on homelessness or poverty, or a House committee on the spiritual crisis facing this nation and the world. So as we take a look at this, we are reminded again and again that in many ways, our ways are not God's ways. And as we look at our words and our language, we can look at the idea of praise and lament. Like, what percentage of our daily discourse is praise and hopefulness, and which is lament? Both have a purpose. There's nothing wrong with lament and concerns, genuine concerns and dismay at things, but is there a balance? Where is the needle on your barometer of praise and lament? And you could layer that in with the idea of God's ways might be more praiseworthy, that lens, and our ways might be focusing this more on the lament. So think of the needle on your barometer of God's ways and man's ways, and where you are on the spectrum. What are you hearing yourself say? What are you hearing others around you say? Is it praise or is it lament? If it's lament, it might be coming more from the concept and operating platform of our ways, and the praise might be operating more from the platform and lens of God's ways. So we need to listen for these words and listen for what they're telling us. On our calls, we've all been waiting and discerning and listening. And we've also been focused lately on taking action. And one of our action points has been forming the General Assembly. And we continue to work on that and look into information about that. And we're going to have a meeting coming up soon to further the process of implementing a General Assembly here for the state of Illinois. And then we'll be producing and establishing General Assemblies in every county of the state. Other topics we might explore in the new year are what would Jesus do? Jesus says that we can do everything that he can do and more, but for some reason we've all kind of shot ourselves in the foot by waiting for an electrical appliance to cure all of our ills when God told us we can cure ourselves and others and more. We also can look at our lament and our joys. There's nothing wrong with either one in the full expression of human existence. We all have joys and genuine laments, and they're all part of who we are. And nobody needs to deny any part of who they are. And I do believe we will be looking at what is moving the needle in our lives. Sometimes on the call, I'm struck by the idea that we all dance around the idea of anger. And in my personal relationships with people who are struggling with physical and real life issues, I'm struck often by the lack of anger. And I don't know why we all disavow anger. It's lower on the chart of consciousness, but it's somewhere on the chart. It's showing some movement up. I think it's about 200, but it's getting you somewhere. So if it's an energy you can use and acknowledge and harness, it's not something we should certainly or make a point of disavowing ourselves. So on this Saturday call, we will be talking about the importance of words, and we will be sharing time together, which is an action that we participate in every Saturday. And in all that, I do believe we're making and have made, I know we've made many important connections and many terrific friendships around the state with our small little groups that have established themselves and continue to meet. And that is exactly what we can do. When we ask what we can do, what action we can take, we can do just that. We can follow the model and create our own cells, our own networks, and create an overlapping network of groups across the state. This is exactly what we're doing. Jim Downs sends out a weekly positive qualities message, and this week it was about the malleability of our thinking and our growing in our philosophical selves and our mental capacity. And that is, it's an endless process of questioning, discerning, building up and tearing down and starting over again. And in all that, we don't always have all the answers to all the questions, and that's part of the process. And in Jim's in his sharing this week, he included a Mark Twain quote, and the quote was, I was grateful to have a quick answer to the question, and that answer was, I don't know. So I don't think we have all the answers here at Illinois Bridging Awareness, but I think we have the grateful part, and we could be thankful for that together and individually. If you would like to join us on the Saturday call, the Saturday call is every Saturday at 9 a.m. Central Time on Zoom. I will be happy to send you an invitation. I'll include my email in the description of this video so I can do so. And I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.